On this episode of AHA, discover what dreams may come.
I am more influenced by 20th century filmmakers, specifically 20th century British filmmakers.
A Sacramento artist living his life's dream.
I did photography all through the 60s. I was what they called a street photographer.
Meet an artist who interconnects his love of art and sports.
If you don't get the eyes and the rest of the face, you can't paint your way out of a bad drawing.
Elaborate paintings on an unusual canvas.
The first time I saw the dye hit the silk, I was in love.
An artist's use of unconventional materials drives his creativity.
The steel always is interesting because I don't know what its former life was or where its brothers and sisters are going.
It's all ahead on this episode of AHA. Funding for AHA has been provided by your contribution and by contributions to the WMHT Venture Fund. Contributors include the Leo Cox Beach Philanthropic Foundation, Chet and Karen Opalka, Robert and Doris Fisher-Malsardi, and the Robeson Family Foundation.
At M&T Bank, we understand that the vitality of our communities is crucial to our continued success. That is why we take an active role in our community. M&T is pleased to support WMHT programming that highlights the arts, and we invite you to do the same.
Hugh Johnson Advisors proudly supports the arts in our region. The Hugh Johnson Advisors team has been providing investment counsel and fiduciary advice to nonprofits and endowments for over 20 years. More information at hjadvisors.com.
Hi, I'm Katie G, and this is AHA, a house for arts, a place for all things creative. Tonight on AHA, we begin with a profile of artist Stephen Hannock, an American painter known for his atmospheric landscapes in which he creates a unique luminosity using his signature style. We spoke with Mr. Hannock recently to discuss his life and his art.
Bringing to life ideas that even the smartest people seem to be missing is the challenge. And there's a lot of ways I am excited about doing that. There's so much art out there that inspires me. I think what I'm finding is a preeminent challenge to me is to pay homage to these painters that have painted before me, that are painting at the same time I am now. In ways that continue to challenge the viewer. One, for example, I choose not to use conventional media. I use conventional paint, but the way I paint it, I don't use brushes. I don't use traditional ways of applying the paint. I physically polish the surface with power tools that create these low light moods, these end of the day moods, without any glare from the gallery lights coming through to break that mood. And that's done by ripping through these canvases with the power tools. As well, you create accidents in the paint that can't possibly be achieved otherwise. You weave paint in that way rather than apply paint. The weaving tends to keep you off guard to the point where you're forced to be a curator of these accidents. And I think the better curator you are of these accidents, the better painting you get. As many in my generation have been, I was influenced by movies. I am more influenced by 20th century filmmakers, specifically 20th century British filmmakers. Directors like Alfred Hitchcock or David Lean, for example, would use exceptionally long, establishing shots to set the mood for the stories they're about to tell. In setting those stages became the advent for my vistas with text, where I'd set the stage with these paintings and tell stories literally written through the paintings. I am invigorated by bringing to life ideas that are appreciated from a static perspective. The viewer moves in front of the piece, and the viewer's imagination is engaged rather than being fed a succession of completed ideas. If you ever cross, when you ever walk over a bridge of a river, it's really a cosmic connection that's made, you being over that water. It's really a very palpable sensation. For me, it's not just that, it is a reflective surface. It's a critical tool for creating mood that will allow your stories to be absorbed in the way you want them to be taken in. Something about the natural cleansing process of the spring flooded river that I really respond to. I'm particularly fascinated by ships on water. It has to be the result of an ongoing project that I've been doing with Sting since the early years of the millennium. But he grew up in a shipping town. He literally grew up on a street that had a shipyard at the end of the street. And as the months went by and the ships were completed, they would literally block out the light of day. And then one day, the ships would go and the city would be changed. There would be light everywhere and everybody's mood would be changed. And that's an incredible thing to think about. It's very hard not to be moved by a community that makes ships for a third of the planet for hundreds of years, and then over a 10-year period, that entire industry goes. 1 million people were out of work. We've seen some horrible depressions in Detroit as Americans, but we saw nothing like what happened when the ships and the coal mines closed in northern England. So in the early part of the millennium, Sting was actually asked to sing at the ribbon cutting of the Sage Gateshead. The Sage Gateshead is a remarkable performing arts center designed by Sir Norman Foster. The city of Newcastle won a lottery to have this performing arts center be the anchor to a renaissance that was currently underway after the shipyards and the coal mines had closed a few decades before. And Sting was asked to sing at the ribbon cutting. And I remember he came up to me right after the millennium happened. And he goes, "What do you think? You think there's a painting there? Can we?" I said, "Geez, well, I'm sure we could come up with something. Let me think about it." I had to turn this into a vista with text. And that piece became the Northern City Renaissance, which is the vista of the Tyne facing east as it goes out to the sea. And rather than depicting the slag heaps of the abandoned shipyards today, I took each of these yards and celebrated them as sort of ghosted, ethereal villages, now not occupied villages, as glowing places along the river, echoed by the now closed shipyards that became glowing dots through this landscape that went out to the North Sea. And it created this really interesting menagerie of luminosity, not unlike my incendiary nocturnes, of quickly moving light. And here the light had moved, so to speak, over hundreds of years, the same type of composition. Currently being published as we speak is our first ever letterpress book of my woodcuts, my first woodcuts since working with Leonard Baskin 40 years ago, and the lyrics to his songs, beautifully designed by Russell Moret, the topographer, in ways that echo the old labor bills from the shipyards. It's just a stunning book. As an artist, and my old dear friend and mentor Lane Faison used to say that, remind me all the time, that all art is contemporary art. And so if you're looking at the old masters, they were doing it in the day when they were breathing. So to understand that art, you need to go back to what was going on in the culture then. It doesn't matter whether it was done yesterday or done 400 years ago. Those artists had to deal with many of the same things we're doing today in order to bring their idea to life. And that's an incredibly invigorating feeling to have, in that it's important for artists to feel included in their culture, whether they're loners or not. You want to feel some sort of inclusion. You want to feel that the ideas you're bringing to life are having an impact on that culture. And a thought like that is a really invigorating supportive confidence.
Best known for his portraits of artists in their own space, photographer Kurt Fishback has continued to set the bar as a craftsman for over 50 years, all the while educating artists of the future. Let's sit down with Fishback in his Sacramento, California studio.
I get to do what I want to do every day, whether it makes me a living or not. I thought it would go away right out of grad school, because all the way through grad school, I was expected to make art. But then I decided, well, I expected myself to make art for the rest of my life, so I'm stuck. Well, I did photography all through the 60s. I was what they called a street photographer. I made portraits of people with existing light in the street. You know, I'd sneak up on people all over the world. And I loved doing that, and I just had a nice feel for being around people and photographing them. Well, that's 54 years of my own work. I mean, when I started out, I did figure drawing. I did all of the gut stuff. And the firm transition happened in 1973. I was teaching at College of the Siskiyous in Weed, and I was teaching painting, drawing, design, and art history. I was the two-dimensional part of the art department. And my dad asked me to come teach with him at his school of photography. And I said, "Are you sure? He always told me we shouldn't work together, that we might learn to be enemies." And what he knew and nobody else did is that he was ill. And so I was left to kind of step into his shoes. There's always been this thread that's run through it, and that's the fact that I need to be a craftsman. I need to be in touch with whatever craft I'm working. It doesn't matter what medium it is. It doesn't matter whether it's clay, or whether it's photography, whether it's using pencils. And then in 1979, I basically decided to go out on my own. And I opened a studio in Sacramento, and I wound up doing a lot of commercial work, and then I started doing the artist portraits. I started making the artist portraits with the idea in mind of sharing artists with the public and saying, this is what they look like. They put their shoes on one at a time, and just like we do, they're just people. Chuck Close, Ansel Adams early on, Brett Weston, who was one of Edward's sons, all of his sons, Bob Arneson, William Wiley, Roy DeForest, Alex Katz in New York, Andre Cortege when he was 92. Making a portrait is a partnership. The subject that sits for the portrait is always at least 50%, sometimes more, of the portrait. Their concept of who they are, where they want to be photographed. And I think it's that if I have the honor of being around people that love art as much as I do, then I need to show that respect. I think what's grown has been my understanding of why to do it, and why being able to practice what I know is such a blessing. I think that's kind of the key to it all.
The ancient Chinese philosopher Confucius said, "Choose a job you love and you will never have to work a day in your life." One Central Florida sports artist lives his life by that credo. David Blondell combines two passions, using his artistic skills to recreate some of sports' most memorable moments.
What I do is I'm a sports artist. I do action portraits of players on different basketball teams primarily. I've done a lot of work with the Orlando Magic, and now I'm doing a lot of work with the University of Kentucky, where I'm from. How I put together a composition to bring it to life is you have to know what figures to put in what poses, and that there's a lot of trial and error in that. As you're creating the composition, you do have to take into account a flow. Are you telling the player's story via their expressions, via their personality? I think a lot of that goes into a successful piece. The art process I use is quite tedious when you try to get the accuracy of a person's face. You have to be very accurate and careful with the drawing. As I'm closely painting someone's face, and I use a jeweler's loupe on top of their photographs. So I'll look at their picture, then paint, and go back and look and paint. And it's a very tedious back and forth process. It's like I'm looking into their eyes, I'm looking into their soul, and I'm getting involved, you know, not necessarily emotionally, but just as part of the project. If you don't get the eyes and the rest of the face, you can't paint your way out of a bad drawing. And so for me, that's the key. In 2012, I went to New Orleans for the Final Four, and I ran into Coach Joe B. Hall, who was I knew when I was in Lexington, and he put me in touch with Coach Calipari and the UK administration, and it's just been great. I've been very lucky to do several projects for them now. The time can go from very slow to very fast, depends on what kind of flow you get into, or if you know you make any mistakes. Certainly, that's the beauty about painting. You can always go back and paint over your mistakes. The 2012 artwork, it took about 8 months, start to finish. And it was a very tedious process because I had a lot of faces to paint. We did about, I guess, 17 figures as part of that composition. That went very well, and I've just completed a one for their 1978 championship team, which Coach Hall led, and Jack Gibbons. And I was just very flattered when they asked me to do that commemorative print for them. When you sit back and look at it, okay, I think I did a pretty good job there. And then to have that validated by fan support and comments you get from people who are buying the prints, that makes all that tedious labor all worth it. There's just nothing like it in the world.
Up next, we meet Pamela Glose, a Central Florida artist who says she constantly is inspired by the bright colors she finds in nature. Her inspirations take form in elaborate and colorful figures that she paints all on silk.
Never even heard of silk painting, and it was introduced in that class, and the first time I saw the dye hit the silk, I was in love. I fell hard, and that's what I wanted to do. From beginning to end, it's all there for you. It's so wonderful to have the internet available and to be able to share it worldwide. I get comments from all over the world. People send me emails and make comments, and I get to help them with their questions, and it's great.
Finally, in Ohio, artist Mike Elsass is fast becoming an international success with this combination of color, energy, and art. With no formal art training, Mike is using his passion and unique vision to work with steel and natural color sources to create his works. For this artist, it's not about the usual, it's all about the unusual.
I grew up in a small town north of here in Botkins, Ohio. And we didn't have art. I played sports, baseball, basketball. I always enjoyed art, but we didn't have any classes or no formal training. I went to school at Ohio University, journalism major, and had no formal training. Then I sold health insurance to schools and corporations. I was introduced to art by Roger Sayre. He was a well-known artist. I bought some of his art back in the 80s and met Roger. He painted on steel. Got to know Roger and took a space at the Front Street warehouses where I became his studio assistant for 3 or 4 years. And I would go out on the road and take a load of steel in the back of my truck and paint it wherever I might be in the patina of the ocean spray or the desert or sun, rain, all added to the steel. I don't really know of anybody using weathered steel on a full-time basis. It's pretty gritty. For the recycled steel, a lot of it comes from a scrapyard just a quarter of a mile from here. It represents aging and imperfection and the trials and tribulations that we go through in life. The steel always is interesting because I don't know what its former life was or where its brothers and sisters are going. And it's interesting, there's a lot of textures, imperfections, and different imagery that comes out of the steels. It also represents strength and durability. Some of my work you could stand on. I'm not sure that's much of a selling point. I pretty much paint brush before the brain, which means I paint first and think about it later. Not worried about mistakes, not knowing which direction the piece is going to hang. So I'm just enjoying the moment, being in the moment, and getting into whatever textures and colors I might be using that day. I just love the color and texture, and I paint very texturally with a lot of texture. Use pumice, steel shavings, tar, silicate sand from local gravel pits, literally everything in the store. And I just love the use of color and learning how to apply it and blend it with texture. I paint acrylic on steel, and then I finish it off with an oil, which stops the oxidation. I paint so fast, so I'm painting on 20, 30 pieces at one time. I paint 30, 40, 50, 60 days on pieces. Kind of represents life and the different places and trials we've been exposed to. I think that's the biggest skill an abstract artist has, is knowing when to quit. And I think I get about 1 out of 15 that are really good, and I seem to know on those. The rest of them, it seems like I'm continually painting on them. If you don't worry about finishing it out and you just enjoy the moment, then it's not so critical to try to decide that. I do classes, and they're called Brush Before the Brain, and you paint first, you think about it later, and there's no mistakes. I also have a charity side of things. I enjoy being able to donate to charities and have them either through a class or the artwork add value that way. So I'll probably do more charitable work. Well, I'm painting big pieces, 10-footers, triplicates, that size, and I'm going organic, where I don't use as much paint and I use more of the elements of nature and texture. So I've been able to travel around, and so my inspiration comes from different locations. Appreciation of just being alive and being able to paint and have spaces to paint in.
And that wraps it up for this edition of AHA. For more arts and culture, visit WMHT.org/AHA, where you'll find features about our creative world in our backyards and across the country. Until next time, I'm Katie G. Thanks for watching. Funding for AHA has been provided by your contribution and by contributions to the WMHT Venture Fund. Contributors include the Leo Cox Beach Philanthropic Foundation, Chet and Karen Opalka, Robert and Doris Fisher-Malsardi, and the Robeson Family Foundation.
At M&T Bank, we understand that the vitality of our communities is crucial to our continued success. That is why we take an active role in our community. M&T is pleased to support WMHT programming that highlights the arts, and we invite you to do the same.
Hugh Johnson Advisors proudly supports the arts in our region. The Hugh Johnson Advisors team has been providing investment counsel and fiduciary advice to nonprofits and endowments for over 20 years. More information at hjadvisors.com.